And yeah, he had some interesting things to say. One of them was, in fact, that he thought at moments there was times when he was hanging out with Frank that Frank almost was in awe. He was like, "Wow, this is really happening," you know. I mean, like sometimes he really didn't believe, you know. He just played the White House or something, or he just met Queen Elizabeth, and he was on a yacht somewhere with who knows who, you know, and he was doing movies and all. And then all at once he was going, you know, is this really? What am I doing? You know, like, yeah, this,
Hard to imagine.
huh?
Hard to imagine.
Yeah. And there was another thing that Pete said. He said Frank told him, like, when he was on the early days when he was on the road with Dorsey and those guys, you know, he was just a kid. Driving through those little towns across the country at night, you know, and Frank said he would sit by the window and look out at all the little houses and stuff and the picket fences and all, you know, people. And he said something like, you know, he just thought, I'll never see this, you know. I'll never, he knew he was going somewhere, you know. He just thought that this is not where I'm going to be. I'm never going to do this, you know.
Right.
And he didn't.
No.
He didn't. Yeah, that's one of my biggest regrets. I never got to meet Frank. I saw him perform once from a distance, but I met his son.
Yeah.
Yeah. Frank Jr. just for a minute and talked a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. And Tony Bennett, I think I told you, Tony rehearsed in my shop.
No, I didn't know that.
Huh?
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. That is funny. George Barnes, you ever heard that name? George Barnes, Ruby Brass. Ruby Brass, a great trumpet player. They're all gone. George Barnes, legendary guitar player. And George was hanging out. You know, I used to work on George's guitars and stuff. And they were getting ready to do an album with Tony Bennett. The George Barnes Quartet. I think the music of George Gershwin with Tony Bennett. I forget the name of the album. It was in that zone somewhere.
Yeah.
And I had the shop in the city at the time. And hard for me to imagine they couldn't find a place to rehearse because Tony only had, I think he said he was like late at night was the only time he could do it because of his schedule and from coming from California or whatever. And George says that, Carl, do you think we could maybe, because I had one room up there. It was like, you know, the room where people used to just hang out at. I had a couch there and a TV and a radio and a stereo system. People used to come in and just crash there, you know. So he said, do you think we could do that? I said, oh, yeah, Tony Bennett's going to be here, sure. Yeah. And he came up. Anthony Benedetto, he came up, yeah. And I got to, know him after that. And I don't know Tony Bennett now, but he would know. He might remember that. I'm sure if somebody twisted his little brain, he would remember he rehearsed at that place somewhere along the line.
Right.
But if you went up to him and said, "Hey, you know Carl Thomas," he's not going to know who I am. You know, I'm not saying that. But Bobby Pratt, the piano player that I used to play with a lot down at the Toros, Bobby Pratt and Tony grew up together in Astoria when he was Anthony Benedetto. And Bobby, from what I understand, was probably one of Tony's first piano players, and they were friends all the way through, you know. And Tony would come down to Toros sometimes and hang out because he was a friend of Bob's, you know. And when Bobby passed away, Tony flew in from California and did a eulogy for him, you know. Very nice. Yeah. But, you know, it was, and I was again, the kid, 1950, you know, buying records, and one of the records I had was Tony Bennett, Because of You, you know, he was doing a big thing there. It's great. Wow. Yeah. He did some Hank Williams stuff too, did you know that?
No.
Cold Heart, he had a big hit on that.
Really?
1951, 52, something like that. Yeah. Tony Bennett. Yeah, but Frank, that would have been. I'd have died. Frank, can I just play a couple of chords and you could sing about wee small hours or what?